Hello, my loves. This is the first episode of Radiance, which is the rebrand from Elite Vitality. And it's already been a roller coaster and I haven't even recorded the first episode yet. So I changed the name of it when I left Sri Lanka, which was at the end of April. And I had come to India to come to Goa, and I was doing a yoga teacher training in Goa for Ashtanga Vinyasa, which was such a beautiful, beautiful experience. So I came to Goa a week early just to settle in. I packed up everything in Sri Lanka, all of my life there, came to Goa, and then just had some big epiphanies actually in Goa that meant that I decided to change the name of the podcast. So this first episode really is just an exploration into why and what that means, and a little bit of the background story, I think, which also means diving into why I've been having so much resistance to recording this episode, an enormous amount of resistance. Because I've now finished the yoga teacher training. I'm now in Oroville. My brother is here. I've been spending a lot of time with the other friend here and have just felt so stuck in recording this first episode. So to give you a bit of context into why that might be and why I've changed it from Elite Vitality and what even is Radical Radiance anyway, why are we going in that direction? I think just to take you along on the journey with me, because that's what this next chapter of the podcast is also going to be. It's what the first chapter was, this is what the second chapter will be. Just to give a bit of background context, I obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but I've always been very, very interested in spirituality. I was raised in a non-denominational Christian family, non-denominational Christian religion that was actually very, very strict. It had a lot of rules, a lot of things that you had to do in order to be accepted by God. And it was a very, I would say, just purely speaking from my own experience of growing up in this religion. I left when I was like 19 or 20, so it was the first 2 decades of my life. But it was I would say it was a God that I never really was able to connect with. It was something that felt very, very, very patriarchal, very vengeful, very angry God. And it was something that I never had a sense of. It was something that I had a lot of fear of. I was very afraid of being punished for doing the wrong thing. And my whole life, actually, growing up, we didn't have a TV growing up, so I've always read a lot of books, like an outrageous, almost disturbing amount of books, I would say, and a few people in my life have called me out on it recently. But growing up as a child, started reading from a very, very, very young age, and was endlessly fascinated by just the nature of life and having explanations for things and understanding why things were the way they were. Reading encyclopedias, reading books, endless books on space, on nature and natural phenomena, the weather, mountains, plants, animals, gemstones, all things of nature. Being completely obsessed with these things from a very, very young age. And also not just about learning about them, but I also was obsessed with being outside, collecting things, collecting skulls of animals that had died in the park. We grew up with our backyard backing onto an enormous national park. So I'd go out into the national park and just collect bones and plants and ants and beetles and bird shells and all kinds of different feathers, all kinds of different things. And I made my own museum. I had my own museum as a child, which is such a bizarre thing to do. And I used to make people visitors that came to our house come and look at my museum, and everything was in there labeled with the description of what it was, all these different things. So my whole life I've been like this. I'm still exactly like this, actually, which is sometimes funny to think of. And obviously growing up in this religion, I was very, 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 very different from everyone else at school. I dressed very differently as part of the rules of the religion. I was just obviously very different. I wasn't allowed to participate in a lot of the activities that there were at school. I wasn't watching any of the TV shows. I wasn't listening to music. I didn't watch movies. Any of these things that kids related on, I wasn't doing. So I was obviously very, very different from everyone else, and I was obviously relentlessly bullied in many, many, many different ways throughout the course of my almost entire school life, actually, from grade prep up until about year 9. And all of this just to say that I think this is very clearly why I've had so much resistance in recording this episode, because I've been very ostracized in the past for being a spiritual person or being different from other people through the religion or through my interests or through spirituality or any of these things. And that is the direction that I want to take my podcast in. So obviously there's a lot of very, very young, frightened parts of me that are just have been over the last few weeks, I think, really just feeling this sensation of like, oh, actually, remember that it wasn't safe to do this? Like, remember how much you suffered growing up for being so different to everyone else, for having these interests, for talking about these things, for being curious in these things, for wanting to explore them. And obviously as an adult now, as someone that's 35, I completely understand that I get to create my own safety. I create my own safety within myself. I create my own safety within my connection to life and the divine, which is exactly what I want to talk about. And it is safe now to do it. So that's why I'm finally recording this episode now. I wrote it out and explored it quite deeply this morning in a beautiful cafe here in Oroville, just to put all of my thoughts in order, which I actually don't normally do before recording podcast episodes, but I've been encouraged to try it more. And yeah, today it feels really nice to do that. So what is Radical Radiance and why the transition from Elite Vitality to this? And of course, Elite Vitality it will always be something that I will talk about because it is something incredibly important. It's invaluable in our life. It is vital. It's vitally important to have a very, very, very high level of energy and health in our physical body system. And for me, this territory is very comfortable, right? I studied this. I studied it as an undergrad. I did a master's in clinical exercise physiology. I've always been fascinated by psychology and the mind and the brain. So the physical body and the systems and the way that it works is an area of a lot of comfort for me. It's a comfortable space. It's something that I love. It's something that I love working within myself, my own energy, my own vitality, my own optimizing these things. It's something that I work with a lot with my clients, and they have incredible results in their own life too. But there suddenly just came this point where there was this kind of niggling feeling in the background of like, but when are you going to start talking about all these other things? When are you going to start sharing all these other things? Because I was never hiding anything. I was never keeping anything secret, I think. But there were definitely parts, and they felt so precious and so, not fragile, but so delicate, maybe is the right word. And I don't know that I felt vulnerable, like safely vulnerable enough to share them. But these nudges got stronger and stronger, and I started feeling more and more uncomfortable. And I really just learned to trust that when I feel these nudges from life, I have to follow them. I have to sit with them and let them be uncomfortable, as I have been doing the last few weeks, and explore what those feelings are, and then figure out how to find a way to take action on them anyway, which I now am. So what does it mean to be transitioning more from Elite Vitality into something beyond that? That's what this feels like to me. And it's an evolution of myself, and it is an evolution of myself. This is just exactly what I live and what I share with you. What I share with you is exactly what I live. I don't speak about anything that I haven't experienced in my own self first. And it has been an evolution over the last few years from what started, and will always hold a very dear place in my heart, but what started as optimizing my physical self, optimizing my mind as much as I could, optimizing my physical health, my energy levels, the environment that I'm in, the kind of practices that I have, which then really opened a lot of doors. And there were doors that have always been open, I think. I've always been a very, very sensitive, very intuitive child. As a child, it was more of a curse than a blessing, I would say, to be so sensitive. And all of these things were kind of happening in the background, underneath the surface maybe. And then being able to be away from a big city and not working in a 9-to-5, and being able to have space and time and energy to optimize my physical body and start exploring these things more. Really, the connection of those two things led to something very, very big opening up in my life, I would say. And that's what Radical Radiance is. This is an exploration of what happens when we go beyond the physical body. What is beyond the physical body? What does it mean to be connected to life. And life with a capital L. I'm always talking about life with a capital L. And for me, it's a physical being. It's a physical entity. I don't know if entity is the right word. There's not really a big enough word for what it is. And all of these words are so loaded. So they all have so much baggage. The word God, I obviously have resistance to growing up in the religion. I'm increasingly having less and less resistance to it the more I use it and the more I interact with writings and things that use it in a different way than how I grew up with it. But I still feel some resistance to it as a masculine thing, I think. And of course it's beyond gender. But again, of course, and in India, this is such a beautiful thing that the face of divinity has, the essence of divinity has so many different faces that we get to interact with. And in India, the masculine form of this and the feminine form of this, the Shiva and the Shakti, have thousands of different faces, thousands and thousands, all with different personalities, all with different look, like a different look, or with different colors, with different personalities, with different qualities, with different relationships, so that we really, as these very not basic human beings, but as people that have maybe limited understanding of what it is to conceive of a being so infinite and so enormous, it's helpful for us to have so many different personalities and faces and entities to be able to have friendships with them and understand them in different ways and explore them in different ways. So all of that just to say that, yeah, for me, life is she has a feminine essence. She's very, very, very nurturing, very, very, very loving, very, 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 what's the right way? There's so many different ways to explore this, but very, very, very connected to us. She wants to connect to us. She's always talking to us. She's always interacting with us. But just most of the time we're so caught up in our own minds and running around 1,000 miles an hour that we cannot even notice anything of her around us, let alone her speaking directly to us. Whether you want to call this your higher self, or whether you want to call it a connection to the divine or an interaction with God, or I'm not really necessarily sure that it matters to make such distinctions. And certainly I'm not rigorous about this in my own life. But it is a practice of going beyond building a connection to our self and building a trust with ourself, which obviously starts with physical health and vitality, but goes far beyond that. And the other side of that coin is building a connection and a trust and a relationship with life itself, with this entity that is far, far beyond us. And it's the rhythm of all of life, all of nature, of the entire cosmos, the entire existence of being, of all of the divine, of all of existence that there has ever been and will ever be, and that we are of course a part of. And so as I explored these things more and more within myself in a lot of different ways, and found ways to come back to these connections and to become more sensitive to them and become more open to them and to become much, much, much more trusting of them, I got to start living life in a very, very specific way. And the more I started living life in this specific way and sharing about it online, the more I started getting asked the same questions over and over and over again. How are you living your life this way? Why are you so happy all the time? And are you actually this happy all the time? Because it seems like it might be fake, because how would you be that happy all the time? Is it fake? Why are you not suffering more? And if you're not suffering more, why are you not showing that you're suffering more? Why do you seem to be so lucky? How do you have so much energy, and why do you have so much energy? How do you just trust that things are going to work out? How can you just live your life and structure your life in this way without any guarantees, without much certainty at all, and really just living freely? These are questions I get asked over and over and over again. And the answer to the questions is all the same thing. And that's what I want to share so much more of in this podcast, because an enormous part of it is elite vitality, to be honest. It is having an enormous amount of energy and knowing how to create that physiologically in your body. It is being able to wake up in a good mood, because you're doing all of the right things in your lifestyle to set that up for yourself. And the answers in that sense are very, very simple. I've covered them in lots of previous podcast episodes. It always has to do with how you're moving your body. It always has to do with how you're eating. It has to do with how much you're spending time outside in nature, in the sunlight. It has to do with the kind of people that you're around, how much sleep you're getting, all of these very, very, very basic physiological things. But the thing beyond that, and the thing that I think felt scared to share more of openly and vulnerably, because I don't have the proof, quote unquote, beyond me living it in my own life. I don't have the research papers. I don't have the scientific evidence behind these things. And growing up as somebody obsessed with these things, and having also a lot of friends in Melbourne that are doctors and that have PhDs and this kind of thing, and there always being this thing of like not talking about like woo-woo things, but everything having to be backed by science, to the extent of even using tea tree oil on like an infected piercing. Like, show me the research papers to tell me why, even though you've got maybe 30 piercings that you've used tea tree oil on, where are the research papers that tell me that I can use that on mine, beyond it being anecdotal evidence? So this is something I've had to work through myself over the last, honestly, for years, to be able to talk about things that are real for me without necessarily having a double-blinded study or a randomized control trial to back it up. And it feels scary. It does feel scary. It feels very vulnerable, and these things are so precious to me that it's distressing on many levels to think of them as being misinterpreted, or to say that it's delusional or living in a fantasy realm or any of these things. But these things are also too precious to not share. And if even one person listens to these podcast episodes in this new series, where I feel somewhat slightly more comfortable talking about these things and finds some value in them, and is able to make some sort of meaningful changes in their life that mean that they can trust life more. And I like see this with my clients, and it's a huge part of why I feel called to share these things on here, is that I just don't think that we were meant to live lives of living in a cubicle inside, sitting down at a desk under fluorescent lighting for the majority of our life. I just don't think that we're here on this earth to do that. And I don't have the answers for you of how you're going to figure out how to do something other than that, because no one gave me the answers either. And I was in that environment. I was in an office in a 9-to-5 in Melbourne with no windows, with nothing. And I thought I could live this corporate life of being like a corporate office person and, you know, just have a house and live a normal life and be commuting and, you know, have the weekends and that kind of thing. And it was not long at all before I was just in utter misery, abject misery. And at some point I really was hard on myself. I was like, this isn't it. This is not it. You can't live your whole life like this. Like, I'm sure that this is not it. So if this is not it, how are you going to figure out what is it, you know? How are you going to figure it out? And I didn't know. And I started by optimizing the things that I could optimize. I started meditating. I started eating much better than I was. I was so miserable working in this office that I was eating pastries all the time. I was binge eating like crazy. I was so, my blood sugar levels were insane. I had insane cravings. I had insane skin problems. I put on a lot of weight. I felt so depressed. I would burst into tears randomly all the time. I was really managing my emotions with food. So I was like, okay, we need to clean this up, because how are you going to live? How are you going to make any big changes in your life if you feel like this, right? At the very bare minimum, you have to feel at least okay in your life so that you can start taking some risks. You're not going to take any successful, meaningful risks if your mindset and your body and everything is in complete chaos. And I really understood that. I understood that on some level. So that's where I started. I did a lot of research. I listened to heaps of podcasts, hundreds of podcasts, about intermittent fasting, about controlling my blood sugar levels, about what kind of food to eat, and I just experimented. I didn't take anybody's word as fact. I experimented with my own body. I figured out what works well for me over the course of years. I know we talk about these things and they sound so simple when we're listening to a podcast episode and somebody's telling us this. This took me years. I left Melbourne on a one-way flight and I didn't know what I was going to do. I figured it out as I went along. And I, by all intents and purposes, failed. Because I ran out of money and I had to come back to Melbourne and I had to go back to the office again. I had to do it all again. But I was determined to figure it out. I knew I didn't want to stay in, I could come back to the office to earn some more money, but I knew I wasn't going to stay there. So I left again. And I was like, let's just see again. And again, all of this just to tell you that I didn't have the answers. I didn't know how to do it. And I know, like, I used to listen to these kind of podcasts and be like, yeah, but how? Tell me how. Tell me how. And I'm telling you now, I can share with you how I did it, but I can't tell you how you're going to do it. But if you've got that niggling feeling in the back of your mind, like I did, that surely there's more to life than this. Surely, if we are life having an experience of itself, surely life wants to experience more than just sitting in an office cubicle. If I were all of life, which I am on some levels, I would want more than that, right? If you could have anything you wanted, if you could live any life you wanted and have any experiences you wanted, you would want to experience more than that, right? The world is enormous. There are so many things to see. There are so many beautiful people to meet. There are so many interesting experiences to have. So at some point, I started understanding these things very, very, very experientially. And honestly, this was a big catalyst for me. This was, looking back now in hindsight, I can see how this happened and where it happened. And I think I was experiencing it in some ways in my body, but not in any way that I could pay attention to. Because the thing is, with this patriarchal God thing, and this is the journey that I've been on my whole life, with this angry, patriarchal, vengeful God that demands that you follow his rules and then punishes you if you don't. And then questioning whether everything is preordained or not. And if it's not, how do I navigate that? And if it is, how do I navigate that? And then to leave the religion and have to re-evaluate everything. What does anything mean? What does it mean to dye my hair this color? What does it mean to have a nose piercing? Does it mean I'm going to hell? What is hell? What is heaven? What if I get tattoos? What if I move abroad with a guy that I met at a rave in Nicaragua? What if I don't think about God for 10 years while I'm just living life in my 20s? What if I do all of the things that were like heinously against the religion and see how I feel in my being to do those things? And how does it feel to do all of those things and to feel so alone, so disconnected from any form of divinity, but to have some kernel of knowledge in myself that there is something to connect to, that there is some sort of something much, 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 much bigger than us, that loves us so much, that wants to connect with us. But to be disconnected from that and to feel very alone. And then when we feel very alone like this, all of the burden of figuring everything out comes onto us. And what an enormous, horrifyingly overwhelming burden that is. To have to make sense of this world, this universe that we live in, to make sense of what it is to be a human being, and to feel so important in the universe, and to be so important in the universe, but to also be completely irrelevant in the grand scheme of thousands of millions of billions of years of this galaxy. And what does it all mean anyway? What's the point of it all anyway? Like, what an overwhelmingly just lonely task that is when you have to figure these things out by yourself. And where to come to from there? Where to go from there? And how to know that there's a feeling that we are something divine. Not that just that we have qualities of divinity, but that we are divinity. We are divinity itself. And so there was a very, very, very beautiful analogy of this actually in the yoga teacher training that I just did. And it was the beautiful girl that was teaching us our yoga philosophy classes, which were just they felt so home for me in so many different ways. And there was such permission actually to start talking about these things that are considered very woo-woo, but then actually these things were in the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. They are in the most ancient yogic scriptures from as early as the 6th century. So they're not, and it was such a thing of like, oh, you're not just inventing woo-woo things because you're a Pisces girl living in a fantasy realm. Like, these are things that people have been talking about for centuries and centuries. People far wiser than you, with far more understanding of things than you, have been talking about these things for many, many, many centuries. So you can talk about them now on your podcast. Of course you can. It was such a permission slip, actually. And so the example that she gave was that she was describing the difference between Atman and Brahman, in the sense that the Atman is our individual soul or our individual self, but this kernel of divinity in this physical form, in this physical body. And then Brahman, which is just the universal consciousness, the entirety of existence, the entirety of being, of consciousness, of divinity, of all of life, of whatever words you want to use for this, and how to understand the connection between those two things. And the example that she gave was to think of Brahman, so like the entirety of existence and life and divinity and consciousness and all of these things, to think of that as the entire ocean. The entire ocean that is all that there is. It is all that there is. It is the singularity. It is the only thing. And then us as our own individual beings as a bucket. So we dip a bucket in the ocean, and this bucket is us. This is me. I am a bucket of divinity taken from the ocean. And there is a beautiful quote by Rumi of this, that we're not the, what is it? I just read it before. That we're not a drop in the ocean, but we are the entire ocean in one drop. And we are the entire ocean in one drop. We are the entire ocean, the essence of the entire ocean in one bucket. And we get to live as a bucket. We get to, if I get a bucket of water now, I can do 100,000 different things with the bucket. I can make it into ice blocks and put them in a smoothie. I can water some of these plants. I could go to the beach and make sandcastles. I could bake a cake. I don't know, there's a million different things that we can do with this bucket. And there's 100 million billion different things that we can do with this one physical existence in this particular physical body that we have, in this particular lifetime that we have. And then, of course, once the bucket is ended, once we've finished doing all the things with the bucket, the water evaporates and it ends up back in the ocean. It goes to the cloud and it rains and it ends up back in the ocean again. It's part of the singularity again. It was never different from the singularity, but it was having a separate experience. And I love that analogy so much. It's been in my mind so much. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful way of looking at this, of exploring how do we stay connected to this experience of being the ocean, of the ocean itself, of life, all of life itself, life with a capital L, of all of divinity, of all of this rhythm of existence, of life that is much, much, much greater than us, the rhythm of all of existence, of all of nature, of all of every single being on this planet and beyond, in this galaxy and far beyond. And I had a very specific experience of this looking back. I was in Sri Lanka. I had been there, I'd moved there, was living there in a community, very, very beautiful community of women, exploring lots of different beautiful things. And I had a sound journey at one of my friend's places, she had made a shala at the beach for people to host these sort of things. And another very beautiful friend from Ecuador, she ended up becoming a good friend as well, was doing these sound journeys there with the Tibetan bowls. And I went to my first one, which was a group one of those, and it was genuinely a life-changing experience. The level of relaxation that I got to and the feeling in my body, I'd never felt this feeling before. And I think this was the first time in my life that I'd relaxed to this level, actually, to the extent that I almost felt seasick afterwards. I remember going back into town and meeting friends for dinner and just feeling like so much spaciousness in between all of my cells that I had kind of lost the sense of my being, the proprioception of my being in space, because I'd lost the edges of my physical body, I'd lost the edges of my skin, and I'd created so much space between all of the cells. And so I loved the experience so much that I actually ended up doing a few more one-on-one sessions with her. She came to my room. And now, looking back, I think that was the catalyst for really feeling what this felt like in my body. And I started having a sense of a feeling that I have constantly now, which is that I am a being far beyond this physical vessel. This physical vessel is a part of it. It's a very important part of it. The health of this vessel is very important. But I am something far, far, far more than this physical vessel, and it extends out of me, out of my skin and far outside of me. Sometimes it's far, far outside of me. Sometimes when I'm sleeping, it goes somewhere else entirely. And then as I'm waking up, I can feel it really around me, like in a big nebulous cloud. And it's a very specific color. It's like a hot pink orange color. And it has a density, and it expands and contracts. A lot of different things make it expand and contract. A lot of my practices make it expand and contract. And there are different elements of this thing as well, which then in the yoga teacher training, of course, this sounds like a crazy thing, but they speak of the koshas and the different sheaths of our being. And that's been something that people have been speaking about since the 6th century as well. So it feels woo-woo for me to talk about it. And for some reasons, feel slightly ridiculous talking about it, but it's something so real that many, many different people have experienced, that exists as something real. And the way that I love to visualize this, because this is how I feel it in myself, is if I were to light a candle right now and look at the flame in front of me, I would be able to see the flame, right? I could see the center of the flame, and it has quite an obvious border, the very center. And I think of that as my physical body. And then the flame extends out from there, and it's flickering, it's moving, it's interacting with its environment. If there's a breeze, what the air quality is, how humid the air is, all of these kind of things, whether I'm breathing on it, what type of candle it is, what type of wick it is. It's interacting with its environment, and the environment impacts it. And the outer edges of the flame, you actually can't tell where they end. They could extend out until the end of all of space and time. And we are the same. Our physical body feels like the center of the candle, and that's why it's important that the health and vitality of our physical body is strong, because it influences how far everything else can spread out, and how much impact, how much density, how much energy all of the rest of it has, how much health all of the rest of it has. And it's emanating outwards. And it's constantly interacting with all of life, with the energy of all of life, with all of nature, with all other beings, all other human beings, all other plant beings, all other animal beings, all other beings beyond those things. And so if we are not just a discrete human being in a discrete human form with this skin that we are just inside of, and we are a being that is outside and interacting with all of life, what does that mean for us? How do we live our lives differently when we are that? How do we live our lives differently when we understand that we are completely permeable, and this thing that is us extending outwards is completely interacting with all of life that is coming inwards, and they're both going all the way in and all the way out in this completely symbiotic relationship and interaction. And the more that I connect to that feeling of my own sense of something far beyond what it is to be physical inside of me, whether you want to call it a soul or whatever else you want to call it, and what it is to have that energy inside of myself as something I can connect to in a tangible way, in a real way, and interact with. The more I can connect to that, the more I'm sensitive to what all of life is interacting with me about. All of the nudges, all of the guidance, all of the feeling of being held by something so loving and so nourishing and so playful. She's so playful. And then we get to collaborate with life in a way that is so beautiful, because it's never a thing of a preordained thing that we have to do or we'll be punished. And it's never a thing of we have to do this thing or else. And it's never a thing of that we don't have any free will, and that we're just passively being led from one thing to another, or that we expect life to figure all the things out for us. Of course she's guiding us, but we get to be so active in this. We get to be so collaborative. We get to be so playful. I get to be so clear about what it is that I want to experience in my life, and the type of people I want to meet, and the type of body I want to be in with a specific type of energy, and the type of environments that I want to be in, and the type of things I want to learn. And I get to be so flexible about what life is also bringing me, that the gifts that she brings. And the gifts are sometimes very uncomfortable. They're sometimes very painful. There's sometimes guidance that feels like definitely not what you want to experience in the moment, but it's always things that are going to help us evolve into the next version of us, so that we can become even softer and even more sensitive and even more free, even more loving, because that's all she wants. She wants us as free as we can be, as loving as we can be, as open as we can be, as living with a completely open heart as we can be, so that we can live in a way that's so permeable to all of life and all of the people around us and all of the magic that we're constantly open to, if we're not just feeling so stuck and alone in having to figure it all out for ourselves, because we don't. And the more I tap into this feeling and amplify it, and now I'm very, very, very conscious about what I do in terms of connecting to this feeling and amplifying it. And the practices I do every day are designed around this. My meditations, doing Ashtanga yoga, doing my Kalari, going for walks, being in the sunshine, the things that I eat, the people that I'm around, the type of things, social media and books and podcasts that I consume. It's all very, very intentional. And I use this feeling inside of me as a guide. Are the things I'm doing amplifying this feeling more or not? Are they making me feel more a divine being, or more somebody that's just lost and confused and lonely and trying to have to force things in life, to force things to work out, to force to have rigid plans, to do things in a rigid way, to be very, very, very having a hard time in life? Because I'm not saying that we never have to work hard, but it doesn't have to be a drag. It doesn't have to be awful. It doesn't have to be us fighting against life to rip any shred of joy and delight from this thing that we're struggling through. It was never designed to be like that. We were designed to be here to create as much of a beautiful experience as we can, especially when we're privileged enough to have freedom and to have opportunities and to be able to make beautiful connections and these kind of things. We have to use these opportunities. We have to embrace them and to be able to collaborate with life in a way that's extraordinarily beautiful. So that is what radical radiance means to me. The word radical is, honestly, the root of the word radical in Latin is root. So it means to be rooted. To be rooted in your radiance. To be rooted in the physicality of your being, because heaven is not something out there that we go to. We try to find out there. We're not trying to escape from this and fly somewhere else spiritual. We're not going to nirvana out there. What we are doing is coming and collecting this experience of divinity from the very depths of our being outwards and bringing it back into this body that we are gifted with, because that's the eternal paradox. We are a human being having a human experience, and we are also divine. We are a human being in a human realm, a physical realm, with things like money and relationships and other people and food that we have to eat and sunlight that we have to have and cars that we have to drive, and and we are also a completely spiritual being having a completely spiritual experience. And you can read any spiritual book, any spiritual text, and it's always exploring this. Like, how do we find the balance between these things? How do we find a way to live within these two things coherently, so that we get to have an extraordinarily beautiful experience of life experiencing itself, and we also get to experience what it is to be human and divine, right? And so the more I explore this, the more I realize it has everything to do with how sensitive I can become in my own body, how embodied, and this is a big buzzword that is happening now, but how in my body can I be? How can I find this feeling inside of myself? Not because I'm rationalizing it in some way, not because I'm thinking about it, not because I'm trying to come up with all of the answers, but because I know it in myself, because I'm connected to this divinity within myself. I'm connected to my soul. I'm connected to life within myself. I understand myself as the ocean, even though I am in this bucket. And so the more I can be rooted in this feeling and this knowing in my being, the more I get to be as radiant as I can be. And the more I can emanate out from myself, the delight that I feel, the joy that I feel, the just sheer gratitude that I have for being alive in this body, in this universe, in this beautiful planet, around these beautiful people that I get to meet. We are so lucky. We're so lucky. If you're listening to this podcast now, you're so lucky. So lucky. We are so lucky every day that we wake up alive, having this experience of life, having this experience of vitality. We're so lucky. So that's what radical radiance is. And it feels so good to say all of these things out loud finally, and to record this episode finally, even though it feels scary, and it doesn't feel that scary anymore now that I've actually done it. But I want to talk about all of these things. I want to share the things that have really changed my life dramatically. I want to know your experiences as well of what does it mean for you to be divine? How do you relate to being the entire ocean in one drop? How can we connect to this more in our lives? Because that's the thing that will change everything. It's the thing that changed everything for me. How do we tap into it more? How do we live from this place more? How do we embrace it more? How do we become truly radiant? Because your soul is radiant. Your soul is a sun inside of you. We have to feed it. We have to let it shine. We have to connect to it and let it grow, let it shine. Take away all of the layers of dust, stopping your radiance, and root it within yourself. Share it. So, thank you for joining me for this first episode. I hope that some of this resonates with you. I hope it makes sense. Of course, I will still always be talking about vitality-related things because, of course, it's also so important. And I can't wait to talk more about these things that are so sparkly and so magical and so full of divinity and full of magic and wonder and splendor and all of those wonderful, sparkly, just feeling so held and so loved in this life and so trusting and so open and so full of love and full of freedom. And I wish nothing more than this for you too. Sending you all my love.